Tobacco is one of the most lucrative industries, with the industry valued at $49.47 billion in 2021 in just the United States of America. The industry has maintained its value at $40 billion ever since 2012 because of the addictive nature of the substance. It is a well-documented fact now that smoking is extremely harmful to our health. But this was relatively unknown in the late 1800s and early 1900s because of the lack of scientific research. The alarm bells for big tobacco started ringing in the 1920s and 30s when there was increasing chatter in the medical fraternity linking smoking with developing lung cancer. Cigarette companies were ready to go to any lengths to control the damage caused by this report. Take the Thompson's Mellow Well cigar, for example. They depicted the substance as a health cigar and misled the general population for 2 to 3 decades about the so-called benefits of smoking. We all have seen marketing strategies, but none as evil and sinister as the ones discussed today, because this video will be dedicated to uncovering the business strategies used by the tobacco industry to mislead countless people to use an addictive substance that causes major life-threatening diseases. But where did it all begin? Smoking has extremely deep roots in society, with researchers claiming that Mayan people smoked tobacco in cultural and religious rituals as early as the 1st century BC. Fast forward almost 1500 years to the 1600s, and smoking had become a socially accepted leisure activity in Europe, and the tobacco industry had placed its roots deep into people's lives. The cigarette-making machines as we know them today came about in the early 19th century. These machines, at first, produced about 200 cigarettes per minute, and the ones available today make about 9,000 per minute. Such low-cost and large-scale production of cigarettes laid the red carpet for tobacco companies to increase the size of their customer base in the late 1800s and early 1900s by using misleading advertisements. The perception towards smoking was not the same back then as it is now. Interestingly, American advertisers used the First World War as a backdrop to increase their sales. Several companies used this propaganda to land themselves in the public's good books, and therefore the general population gave away their hard-earned money to the companies who were only pretending to support the American soldiers fighting in the war. If you were shown these ads, could you ignore the heroes that were willing to lay down their lives for their countries? A decade later, people were shown that they should smoke for pleasure or together with their partners. These ads prevailed from the late 1920s till the early 1930s. During the 1930s, there was increased chatter about all the physical distress symptoms smokers were facing, and many people in the medical fraternity were linking smoking to the development of lung cancer. Cigarettes were even referred to as coffin nails, which were not far from the truth. The advert published by Camel in 1933 to counter the negative perception of smoking brought about a sudden shift in the entire industry. The ad was shown in the Liberty magazine, and it said that smoking a fresh Camel cigarette would give the smoker's throat a vacation. Other companies also started following Camel's example and hired physicians to pose for and advertise their brands. Physicians have always been seen as the authority to go to when it comes to health-related matters. Their bits of advice are to be followed to a T, and these physicians were used in several cigarette advertisements. Because what other advertisement strategy would be as profitable as capitalizing on the trust that was placed by the public in the hands of licensed physicians? Another brand that people would see many ads from in the 1930s was Lucky Strike. The brand followed Camel's footsteps. As if that was not enough, the firm would say that they had sent cigarette cartons to physicians for free to get their opinion on the same. Specifically, it was noted that the physicians were approached to see if cigarettes were less irritating for the people with sensitive and tender throats, and the physicians had voted in favor of Lucky Strike. The brand Philip Morris referred to a bogus research, with one ad claiming that after physicians had prescribed Philip Morris, patients with a case of sensitive throat showed significant improvement. Any so-called proof attached to these ads made it more likely for people to trust their brand. Because of such ads, the brand's popularity skyrocketed for the first time in its history. It is diabolical how big tobacco used the face of health in those times and funded fake medical research to represent one of the unhealthiest habits in this world as something recommended by doctors. You would probably not see this in the case of fast food joints. Fried food is unhealthy, and no physician would privately recommend their patients to consume it, let alone feature in advertisements with this absurd recommendation. Then how was it possible for cigarette companies to use doctors to push their products? A regular search on any search engine will show you a plethora of these bogus ads used featuring claims made by multiple companies stating that no harm could come to an individual's health and that cigarettes actually aided digestion and would help women lose weight. Any contradictory research during these times was fought off by these companies using bogus studies funded by the tobacco lobby. This was an effect not just in America, by the way. The Netherlands saw a 90% smoking rate for men aged 20 to 60 in the mid-19th century. Let's put that in perspective, shall we? If you lived in the Netherlands during that time and were at a bus stop with 10 men there, you could be sure that only one person in this crowd would not be a smoker. Of course, this ratio has been completely reversed, with only 20.2% adults smoking in the Netherlands in 2020, as per the Netherlands Expertise Centre for Tobacco Control. There was a contradictory nature to these ads too. Companies would say that cigarettes posed no harm to health, only to turn around and claim in their ads that smoking their particular brand cigarettes were less harmful than those of other brands. Give us a like and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on any of our videos where we expose such manipulative strategies used by big brands for their greed. Now, moving on to the most shocking element of this whole ad campaign. The physicians in all the posters and adverts mentioned so far were not actually physicians. Most of them were merely actors hired by the respective companies. These actors were dressed to look like doctors so that the advert would appear more reliable and trustworthy. Posters saying that 20,000 physicians say Luckies are less irritating, it's toasted, would pop up everywhere for the next 2.5 decades, and people would blindly believe them. These same physicians were no longer just vouching for the healthy status of smoking, but they themselves smoked. And so, these ads showed that the public should follow in their footsteps. Medical journals and doctors' prescription notes now carried cigarette adverts. Doctors' lounges were sponsored by cigarette companies, and companies had researchers on their payroll to counter any genuine studies that could be a cause for concern. Any criticism from actual physicians was dismissed by the doctors on the cigarette company's payroll. These companies wanted no harm to come to this new image of theirs that was raking in so much profit. They had an entire army of doctors who were basically sponsored mouthpieces for the tobacco lobby that would make any licensed doctor rethink their decision of levying any claims about smoking. An ad from the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company published in 1946 will help show how serious these companies were about acquiring as many customers as they could. Another manipulative strategy used by Big Tobacco was planting the seeds in the mind of the public that smoking is a cool thing to do from a very early age. You would find fictional characters like Sherlock Holmes lighting his pipe when trying to solve a case. Not just characters shown in popular movies or TV series, but evil characters in cartoons have had a smoking habit. Think about Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians. Even the Flintstones weren't left alone. Take a look at this episode aired in 1962. Cigarette ads started getting included in magazines and books and put on full display even in colleges. These advertisements changed with the season, but the evil nature remained. Marlboro used infants in their ads. Even Santa Claus wasn't left alone. Soon enough, people started doubting if there existed an actual relationship between developing cancer and smoking packets of cigarettes. People went to the extent of thinking that cancer was a case-by-case development and not something that came about because of smoking. Sowing the seeds of doubt amongst the masses was the exact intention of the tobacco companies, and they were able to pull this off for almost 2 decades. However, science soon caught up to these advertisements. There was a direct link between smoking and lung cancer, and more research only verified the same. However, the US Surgeon General, along with the American Cancer Society, published the most conclusive report showing a direct relationship between smoking and developing cancer on January 11, 1964. In the aftermath of the study, the so-called physicians in cigarette ads started to disappear. There was only so much these companies could do against established medical institutions and governmental bodies that were changing the public view. The battle these tobacco companies were so sure of winning had turned around. By the end of 1965, the tobacco industry was mandated to put warning labels on their packets and warn the public through advertisements of the health risks of smoking. By the 1970s, radio as well as television adverts were banned, and by the end of the next decade, you couldn't smoke on any US flights. Despite all this, numerous people reach for a cigarette whenever they feel distressed. You might attribute such behavior to the human psyche. A 1991 study reported the findings that Joe the Camel, the mascot for Camel cigarettes, was as easily as recognizable as Disney's fan favorite Mickey Mouse to 6-year-olds. A master settlement agreement introduced in 1998 made the tobacco companies claim no wrongdoing, but they still ended up paying $206 billion. The agreement was signed between the companies and the attorneys general of 46 states. The agreement also urged the creation of a body that would carry out tobacco education programs supported by evidence-based research. Let us know in the comments section how you feel about Big Tobacco's manipulative tactics. Check this video we recently did on how Gillette carried out a manipulative campaign targeting women.